well. I have another story to share. This story is not a traditional story. It's a personal story that will be one of the opening pieces of a show that I'll be doing here on November 6th called Traveling Home. I'm working on developing a whole program over the course of the year, and I'm just in the beginning phases, have some good material to work with, and I'm just getting it out there as much as I can. So any feedback is always welcome. And I don't have a title for this, so if you have any working titles you can think of, let me know. By the time I was 9 years old, I had certain things figured out. Like things that I knew would be a part of my life forever. For example, every Thursday night, my father would call and set up the weekend arrangements for our visit. Our parents were divorced. We'd go back and forth, and that was something that happened and continues to happen today. In fact, I was just talking to my dad about traveling out for Christmas. Always would be a part of my life. And also, every night before bed, there would always be a book. Always a story, some way to bring the day to the end, or the day to end. And every time my mother made stewed tomatoes, I would have to eat 2 bites before I could put the rest away and excuse myself from the table. So, like I said, I had certain things figured out about life. And then there were those things that didn't happen regularly, but under just the right circumstances, we would take advantage of. Like those singular, clear, crisp, dark nights when we would package up a big thermos of cocoa, a little telescope, in a backpack with an extra blanket, and head to the beach to watch the stars come out. Oh, when that happened, we went every single time. And by the time I was 9, we had done this so many times, I was the star expert in my family. I knew it all. My strategy was actually pretty simple. When we got there, we would watch the sun go down, and the stars would come out one by one, and always the first thing I could find was the arc to the handle of the Big Dipper. It's pretty easy to spot. And from there I could follow the arc over, and there was Arcturus. Bright star, big bright star. And then I could go back to the Big Dipper and follow the 2 outer stars all the way up, and there was the North Star. Of course, the North Star is the end of the Little Dipper. You see, I was an expert, absolute expert. And it became sort of a certain order to my life to be able to go and see the same stars come out night after night whenever we went. It was also when I was 9 that there was a huge change that came to our lives. My stepfather received the opportunity to go on sabbatical for a year, and he was looking into all the different opportunities and decided on a place called New Zealand. We were living on Long Island at the time, and when we looked at the globe to figure out where New Zealand was, you could basically take a pin and stick it through the globe, and directly, like on the exact opposite side of the world, was New Zealand. That was what it was to us. But of course, when you're a kid, everything's really big. I mean, we could have been going to Disney World for all we knew. I mean, we didn't have quite the perspective. And so it was when we arrived, when we got to New Zealand, and we got a little bit over the jet lag. We weren't greatly fazed at first, my brother and I, because you see, all the things that I had figured out were still pretty much the same. We still read a book every night before we went to bed, and we still had to eat stewed tomatoes. None of that had changed. And there were still crisp, dark nights to go to the beach and watch the stars come out. And the first night that this happened, when we were there, we went through our usual routine. Of course, we had to figure out a good place to go. We didn't, know where the local beach was, where we found it. We got everything packed up, and my brother and I were as confident as we had ever been. We got to the beach, and I could have sworn my parents had just the slightest little smirk on their faces, as if they knew something was coming that we didn't. Well, anyway, we were off. We set out. We got there. We beach combed. We watched the sun go down. Left behind that rainbow that just spreads across the sky. And little by little, that rainbow disappeared. And then one by one, the stars came out. And one by one, my face contorted into such a state of confusion as I looked for the very first time at the southern sky. I was astounded. All of a sudden, everything that had made sense to me no longer made sense. It was, where was there was no Big Dipper. There was no North Star. I mean, you'd think at 9 years old, the southern sky would have no North Star. You'd think I'd get that, but no North Star. And there was, but what I missed most of all was Orion. Because Orion had been my warrior, that stately figure warding off the Taurus, the bull. He was nowhere to be found. I looked up at that mess of stars and thought, this is basically like somebody has just taken Christmas lights and just thrown them. I mean, there was no order to it anymore. Well, finally my parents took pity on me. My stepfather came over and whispered in my ear. He said, Avery, look up there to the north. Tilt your head a little bit, and I bet you'll recognize something. So I did. I looked off to the north, and I tilted my head. Well, you know, there were 3 stars in a row that looked vaguely familiar, so I turned my head a little more, and more, and more, until I was completely upside down. And of course, at 9 years old, you're totally not self-conscious. So I literally had my head between my legs, looking at the sky, upside down, and that was when I found him. I found Orion. He was upside down. Because along the equator, if you will, went from the northern hemisphere, as we look towards the horizon of the southern sky, there's a whole band of constellations that we can see. And you can see those same constellations from the southern hemisphere, except that they're in the horizon of the northern sky because you're on the opposite side of the world. So what looked to me as being completely upside down was actually, well, I was upside down. So I put myself back up and I looked up, and all of a sudden, you know, maybe the sky did make some sense. If I just remembered that things were upside down, or that I was upside down. Now from then on, we had our fair share of cultural experiences. I mean, yes, they speak the same language in New Zealand, but that's about all there is in common. There was a lot to learn, and as I became an adult, I did a lot of traveling and went to a lot of different places and confronted different peoples and geographies, and it was wonderful. And sometimes people ask me why it is, how is it that I can travel so much and move so much and seem to do just fine? And I really think it had something to do with that night when I saw Orion upside down. Because what I learned that night was, you are never so far away from home than the first moment that you realize it. When you look around you and everything looks upside down. But I also learned that when everything looks upside down, maybe it's just you that's upside down. Home is to be found everywhere you go. Home is always closer than you think. Thank you. Thank you.